Passion has always been seen as life's most intense flame. It tears us from routine, hurls us into the abyss of desire, and makes us believe we're experiencing something absolute. But for Nietzsche, every passion carries a shadow, inevitable suffering. The same fire that warms is the one that consumes. What makes us feel alive is also what threatens to destroy our autonomy. Nietzsche didn't write to comfort, but to expose human illusions. He knew that the passionate person forgets themselves, surrenders to the other, and in this movement experiences both greatness and loss. Passion is creation and fall, vital force and prison. To flee from it would be cowardice, to live it, a trial by fire. What if passion's suffering weren't a failure, but an opportunity for transformation? What if each wound were an invitation to forge a stronger soul? Nietzsche challenges us to rethink what it means to love, desire, suffer. Nietzsche saw passion not as an error of human nature, but as one of its most intense expressions. It is excess, overflow, that which tears us from the mediocrity of daily life. Without passion, man becomes lukewarm, repetitive, predictable. Passion is like lightning that breaks through calm, bringing life, energy, and an almost divine sensation of being beyond oneself. However, this same lightning can ignite everything around, destroying the stability the individual believed they possessed. Imagine someone who falls deeply in love. In the first days, they feel elevated, as if they had discovered a secret meaning of existence. Routine loses its weight, the world seems more alive. Each gesture of the beloved carries a brightness that gives strength to endure any adversity. But at the same time, this same surrender generates vulnerability. The passionate person becomes dependent on the other's gaze, measuring their worth by the intensity of response they receive. What was once an overflow of vitality can quickly become an emotional prison. Nietzsche would say that in this movement the paradox of passion is revealed. It makes us more alive precisely by placing us on the brink of losing ourselves. Those who surrender completely don't perceive they're no longer masters of their life, but hostages of an affection that dominates them. Behind passionate intoxication hides the threat of annihilation. And yet, he didn't propose we reject passion. On the contrary, Nietzsche saw it as necessary for overcoming mediocrity. Living only in safety, in the tranquility of lukewarm feelings, would be refusing existence's intensity. Passion is dangerous because it shows us what we're truly capable of. We're capable of feeling without measure, of creating worlds with a glance, of going mad for an idea or a person. The danger lies precisely in experiencing this power without preparation, without awareness of its shadow. Many live lukewarm relationships because they fear what passion might awaken. Others dive headfirst, and they discover not only ecstasy, but also the pain that comes with surrender. Nietzsche would say both paths are insufficient. Fleeing passion is cowardice, blind surrender is slavery. The true challenge is facing passion as a vital force that needs to be tamed, transformed, integrated into our will to power. Think, for example, of someone who finds their passion not in another person, but in a cause, a project, an idea. They consume themselves for work, for the ideal, for the need to accomplish something grand. In the first moments they feel invincible, but with time they perceive they're exhausted, that their personal life has been sacrificed, that excessive dedication has become poison. The same thing that gave meaning now steals balance. This is exactly passion's game, source of strength and destruction at the same time. Nietzsche saw in passion a reflection of life itself. There's no creation without risk, no intensity without pain. Living passionately is accepting that nothing will be stable, that each instant can contain both glory and fall. This awareness tears us from the comfort of common life and forces us to think, is it worth paying the price of intensity? For Nietzsche, yes. But only if we're strong enough not to let ourselves be devoured. Passion, therefore, must be seen as a test. It reveals who we are when we lose control, when we're taken by something greater than ourselves. For some, it becomes destruction. For others, revelation. What makes the difference isn't passion itself, but what we do with it. The passionate person who lets themselves be dragged is condemned to meaningless suffering. But the one who learns to transform this energy, to bear its pain and extract learning from it, finds in passion not poison, but a source of power. Nietzsche invites us not to fear this danger. He knew that the man who avoids passion also loses the chance to transform himself. But he equally knew that the one who seeks it blindly can lose themselves in its flames. Passion is, simultaneously, a gift and a threat. It's in this field of tension that the human reveals themselves, divided between the search for ecstasy and the fear of destruction. Passion, when it reaches its peak, demands something brutal, the renunciation of oneself. The passionate person doesn't just desire, they surrender. It's as if their identity, once firm and clear, begins to dissolve in the beloved object. Nietzsche saw in this movement a kind of inevitable risk. There's no passion without loss of autonomy, without the sensation that one no longer belongs to oneself. This surrender may seem sublime, but brings with it profound suffering, because each time we place our being in another's hands, we become hostages. Who hasn't lived this experience? Being obsessed with a person to the point of measuring one's own days by the tone of their voice, by the look one receives, by the presence or absence of attention. Life narrows and begins to revolve around a single axis. Everything that once mattered seems smaller, and only the fever of wanting to be reciprocated remains. It's at this point that Nietzsche indicates the trap, when we stop being authors of our own life to become characters in another's life. The passionate person forgets their projects, their strength, their will. They live in function of someone or something they cannot control, and suffering is born from this impotence. The more intense the surrender, the greater the wound when distance, silence, rejection arise. It's not about bad luck or chance, but an inevitable consequence. Passion, in its excess, always charges the price of pain. Nietzsche understood this movement is almost irresistible. The human being, taken by passion, feels as if they were more than they are, as if they touch the eternal. It's this illusion of eternity that makes them renounce themselves, believing their life has finally found full meaning in the other. But reality always returns, and with it comes disappointment. No human being can alone carry the expectation of being the center of another's existence. It's in this mismatch that suffering installs itself. Passion asks for the absolute, but only finds the provisional. It's important to perceive that this suffering isn't just psychological. It affects the body, habits, vital energy. The passionate person eats less, sleeps less, always thinks about the same thing. There's inevitable wear, as if life itself was sucked by the beloved object. Nietzsche would say, this is proof we've become servants, that we've abdicated our power in the name of an affection that dominates us. However, there's also beauty in this process. The suffering of surrender reveals the depth of the human being, their capacity to go beyond simple survival. Those who suffer from passion prove they're capable of launching themselves beyond rational calculation, of risking themselves in desire's abyss. This suffering, though painful, is also a sign of vitality. The danger isn't in feeling, but in remaining slave to this feeling, in not learning from the pain it brings. Nietzsche never suggested we stop loving. His criticism wasn't of the feeling itself, but of how we let ourselves be dominated by it. The challenge is finding a way to live passion without losing oneself, to experience surrender without disappearing. This doesn't mean protecting oneself or closing off, but learning to be whole, even in the moment of greatest intensity. It's clear that for most, This task seems impossible. The passionate person always believes they're different, that their story will be unique, that this time there will be no pain. And it's precisely this illusion that imprisons them. Passion is intoxication. It promises eternity, but delivers instability. We believe we're living something absolute, but we're actually always on the edge of the abyss, sustained by a thread of expectation. The suffering of surrender then must not be seen as accident, but as destiny. By loving with intensity, we're inevitably signing a pact with pain. Nietzsche would say this pact shouldn't drive us away from passion, but teach us to face it head-on. Pain is the reminder that we're not gods, that our will to eternity always bumps against life's fragility. Thus, true learning isn't in avoiding surrender, but in crossing through it. Suffering is inevitable, being destroyed optional. The passionate person who survives their own pain, who manages to rise again after losing themselves, discovers a new strength. The surrender didn't annihilate them completely, but transformed them. For Nietzsche, love was never just tenderness, sweetness, or harmony. Behind passionate rapture, there's always a silent struggle, an attempt at possession, a desire to dominate the other. What we call love carries within it the will to power, that primordial force that crosses all existence, the impulse to affirm oneself, to grow, to expand, to conquer. The passionate person doesn't just desire to be with the other, they desire to possess them, mold them, have them as an extension of themselves. It's hard to admit, but just look at our own experiences. How many times does jealousy arise disguised as care? How many times do we demand attention and exclusivity as if it were natural, when in reality it's about control? Love, in its most intense form, doesn't seek equality. It seeks hierarchy. Someone always desires more. Someone always bends more. It's a game of forces, not a pure and innocent surrender. Nietzsche saw this hidden dimension as revealing of human nature itself. When two fall in love, they seem to merge into one. But deep down, they remain two centers of will, each trying to impose their vision, their presence, their way of loving. This tension, far from being a defect, is inevitable. The will to power cannot be annulled. It manifests even in the most tender gestures. When someone says, "You are mine," they carry in that mine the essence of possession. Passion, then, isn't just encounter, but also dispute. Nietzsche didn't condemn this truth. On the contrary, he believed that facing love as a game of power is more honest than keeping it on the pedestal of idealized purity. The danger lies in denying this reality, in believing passion is just altruistic surrender. Denying the will to power in love is deceiving oneself. Accepting it is understanding the depth of effective life. This vision forces us to reconsider what we understand as suffering in passion. Often we don't suffer just because the other distances themselves or doesn't reciprocate, but because our will to dominate finds no space. We want the other to desire us in the same way, to place us at the center of their life, to bend to our longings. When this doesn't happen, we feel frustration as unbearable pain. The root of this pain lies less in love itself and more in the will to power that wasn't realized. Take as an example a relationship where one of the partners demands constant proofs of fidelity. It's not just fear of loss, but desire to have the other under surveillance, under dominion. Or that passion that insists on changing the beloved person, molding them according to expectations. It's love that, under the mask of devotion, reveals its commanding face. Nietzsche shows us that in all these situations, it's the will to power that acts, even if disguised as affection. This realization doesn't need to lead us to cynicism, but to lucidity. Understanding love as will to power frees us from naivety without distancing us from intensity. Instead of seeking impossible purity, we can learn to deal with this tension, recognizing that loving is also fighting, that desiring is also trying to conquer. And perhaps in this struggle lies passion's very beauty. It's a field of forces in movement, a dance between desire and resistance, between surrender and dominion. Nietzsche saw in passion a chance to confront ourselves with this reality. Love isn't the opposite of struggle, but its most intimate form. Those who love know the taste of dispute, even if they don't want to admit it. This dispute can be destructive when we reduce ourselves to hostages of the other, but it can also be creative when it challenges us to grow, to strengthen our individuality in the face of another's presence. Love, as will to power, reveals we're never completely at peace in passion's field. There's always tension, always game, always risk. Passion exposes us to suffering because it cannot be stable. It's fire in movement, will in confrontation. Recognizing this is taking a step beyond naivety and learning to love more consciously, more maturely, without losing intensity, but without being deceived by false harmonies. Nietzsche didn't want to deprive us of passion, but to tear off its masks. He knew that only by facing its hardest face could we transform suffering into something that strengthens instead of destroying. To love is to want, but also to dominate. To love is to surrender, but also to dispute space. Accepting this duality is the beginning of a new understanding of human love. If passion brings inevitable suffering, Nietzsche doesn't interpret it as curse, but as opportunity. Pain for him is never just a burden to be rejected, it's also hammer and chisel, instruments that shape the soul. What tears us apart can, at the same time, reveal a new form of existing. It's in this paradox that Nietzschean greatness resides, not fleeing from pain, but facing it as an essential part of life. Many of us, when suffering from passion, feel we're being unjustly punished. Abandonment, betrayal, the mismatch between what we give and what we receive seem to place us in the role of victims. But Nietzsche deconstructs this vision. For him, pain isn't a sign of injustice, but of vitality. We suffer because we dare to live intensely, because we dare to feel in excess. Suffering is the mark of those who didn't accept lukewarmness, who risked their forces in passion's abyss. Think of the broken heart of someone who dedicated themselves entirely to someone and was left aside. At first, the pain seems unbearable, as if nothing else made sense. But after the shock passes, a possibility emerges, that of rebuilding oneself. In this process, one discovers a strength that was previously hidden. The person realizes they're capable of bearing the unbearable, of walking even while bleeding. This discovery is transformative because it shows we're more resistant than we believed. Nietzsche would call this forging. Suffering heats the soul like fire heats metal. If we don't withstand the temperature, we're consumed. But if we resist, we emerge more solid, firmer, sharper. Passion, then, stops being just a cause of ruin and becomes an occasion for strengthening. What seemed like absolute loss reveals itself as the beginning of new power. Of course, this process isn't automatic. Many let themselves be destroyed by pain, dive into resentment, close themselves to life. Nietzsche would warn that this path is a form of decadence, of refusing the learning that passion brings. Pain only becomes forged when we face it head-on, when we accept crossing through it without denying its presence. Fleeing or victimizing oneself is wasting the chance for growth. In relationships, this means learning to recognize that each disappointment doesn't need to be just scar, but also lesson. The pain of being rejected, for example, can reveal our excessive dependence, our tendency to place the other above ourselves. By perceiving this, we can rebuild ourselves more freely, less submissively. Suffering, in this case, illuminates a truth that passion was hiding. Nietzsche saw in this confrontation a form of greatness. For him, strong spirits are those who bear pain without breaking, who transform each fall into a step to climb higher. Passion's suffering, far from being just tragedy, can become an initiation. It's as if life puts us to the test, asking if we're capable of affirming our strength even when everything seems lost to us. This perspective completely changes our relationship with pain. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" we can ask, "What can I become from this?" This change of perspective is deeply Nietzschean because it shifts focus from passivity to creation. Pain isn't an end, but a means. It's raw material for building a fuller life. The forge metaphor also reveals another important dimension. Suffering isn't linear, but cyclical. Just as metal needs to be heated several times until reaching the desired form, we also go through different pains throughout life. Each passion, each loss, each disappointment is one more hammer blow, one more opportunity to become who we really are. It's in this sense that Nietzsche distances himself from any philosophy that preaches consolation or escape. He didn't want anesthesia, but awakening. Pain is real, and in it there's a truth about us that we cannot ignore. Love that hurts also teaches, and passion that destroys also opens the way for new creation. Fleeing from pain is fleeing from life. Thus, passion's suffering stops being seen as failure and becomes a necessary stage of maturation. Those who cross through it without letting themselves be reduced find a strength that cannot be taken by anyone. It's this strength that prepares the way for the next step, that of learning to love not just the other, but life itself in all its intensity, with its joys and its pains. After crossing through passion with all its intensity and pain, Nietzsche points to a higher path. Overcoming. Not in the sense of denying passion or transforming it into something cold and calculated, but of integrating it into a greater vision of life. This path he calls amor fati, love of fate, radical acceptance of everything that happens, including suffering. Passion, when lived blindly, imprisons us, but when crossed through, it can prepare us for a more mature form of loving. It's no longer about wanting to possess or be possessed, nor expecting the other to save us from solitude. Amor fati means embracing life in its totality, with its encounters and farewells, its glories and its ruins. It's saying yes not just to pleasure, but also to the pain that inevitably accompanies it. Imagine someone who suffered intensely in a relationship. After the fall, they could have closed themselves off, embittered, lost faith in love. But instead, they choose to look back and say, "I wouldn't have been who I am today without this experience." This acceptance is amor fati, the capacity to recognize that even what hurt us most was a necessary part of our formation. Suffering isn't an error to be erased, but an indispensable brick in our construction. Nietzsche saw in this a liberation. When we learn to love fate, we stop fighting against what already is. We're no longer trapped in resentment, in what if it had been different. We embrace life as it came, and by doing this, we become its masters. Passion, with all its pain, stops being a tragic accident and becomes an essential element of our path. This overcoming also transforms how we relate. Instead of seeking in the other salvation or fulfillment, we begin to see love as an encounter between two beings who affirm life. It's no longer the love of lack, but the love of abundance. Those who learned from passion's pain no longer attach in the same way because they don't seek to lose themselves in the other. They love because they overflow, not because they need. They love knowing love can bring pain, but accepting this possibility as an inseparable part of living. Nietzsche knew this posture required courage. Amor fati isn't natural. Human instinct is to resist pain, deny suffering, dream of happiness without flaws. But this is an illusion that keeps us weak and resentful. Only those who learn to say yes to destiny in its totality find true freedom. This acceptance is revolutionary because it doesn't depend on circumstances. Even defeat, loss, solitude can be affirmed as parts of the path. Think of someone who, after a great amorous failure, manages to look at the past and say, "I wouldn't trade this experience for anything because it made me who I am." This phrase, which seems impossible in moments of pain, is the heart of amor fati. It doesn't erase the wound, but integrates it into the narrative of a life that accepts itself fully. Amor fati doesn't mean resignation. It's not simply accepting things passively as they are, but actively affirming life in its totality. It's looking at the past and wanting everything to repeat exactly as it happened without excluding any pain, any loss, any failure. This idea, known as eternal return, is the definitive proof of one who truly learned to love fate. Asking oneself, what if I had to live this life infinite times with all its pains, would I accept it? Is the most radical test Nietzsche proposes. If the answer is yes, if we're capable of embracing even the wounds, then we find an interior freedom that no passion can destroy. At this point, suffering no longer paralyzes us, but becomes an inseparable part of what strengthens us. Pain isn't enemy. Its inseparable companion of all creation. This overcoming doesn't mean absence of suffering, but capacity to live with it without becoming slaves. Those who love fate accept that love will bring pain, but also accept that this pain is part of the very miracle of living. Suffering, far from being enemy, becomes ally in building an affirmative life. By proposing amor fati, Nietzsche offers us a horizon beyond blind passion. He doesn't invite us to be cold, but to be stronger. He doesn't ask us to reject intensity, but to bear it without losing ourselves. Passion is a necessary stage, but not the last. It destroys us, so we can be reborn more conscious, more whole, more affirmative. In amor fati, we stop being victims of passions and become creators of meaning. We love not just the other, but existence itself in all its colors, light and dark. This is the love Nietzsche proposes as overcoming, not love that flees from suffering, but that which welcomes it as an inseparable part of life. After understanding passion as vital force, danger, suffering, will to power, and finally as a stage of overcoming, we arrive at the final point of this journey, the possibility of transforming passion into a path of interior freedom. For Nietzsche, freedom doesn't mean absence of bonds or absolute detachment, but the capacity to live intensely without being enslaved by what one feels. It's affirming life in its totality, even when it presents itself in the form of passion that wounds. Passion, in its initial phase, dominates us. It drags us outside ourselves, demands surrender, makes the other a center around which we begin to orbit. In this stage, there's no freedom, there's dependence. The passionate person loses themselves in expectations, suffers before silence, despairs before absence. Everything in them reduces to the other. But if we cross through this fire without letting ourselves be consumed entirely, we discover something surprising. Passion can teach us to be freer. The first lesson is that of limit. By suffering from loss, jealousy, or rejection, we perceive we cannot control what we feel nor what the other feels. This impotence, when accepted, makes us more lucid. We discover life doesn't belong to us in its totality, and that passion is just a flow that passes through us. Accepting the limit is taking the first step toward interior freedom. The second lesson is that of creation. Passion's pain, when it doesn't destroy us, opens space for us to reinvent ourselves. What seemed just wound transforms into raw material of new meanings. How many people, after devastating passion, rediscover talents, resume projects, dive into self-knowledge? Suffering forces us to look inward and seek new forms of existing. It's in this creative movement that freedom begins to consolidate. Nietzsche believed the free human being is one who says yes to life, including its tragedies. Passion, with all its intensity, is one of the most difficult tests of this yes. Those who manage to cross through it, without denying the pain and without becoming hostage to it, find a strength that cannot be taken by anything external. This strength doesn't depend on the other, but is born from confronting one's own experience. Many confuse freedom with indifference, as if being free were never falling in love again, never getting involved again, but this would be just disguised fear. True freedom isn't refusal, but courage to live again, even knowing there will be suffering. It's being able to love without demanding guarantees, desire without needing to possess, surrender without annulling oneself. This is the ripest fruit of passion crossed through. We can think of someone who, after many amorous disappointments, decides not to close themselves forever, but to open again, now with another consciousness. They don't expect the other to be their salvation, don't project their entire life in a single bond. They love but remain whole. They desire but don't lose themselves. This posture doesn't eliminate pain because pain will always come, but makes it bearable, even transformative. This is the living example of interior freedom. Nietzsche teaches us that being free isn't fleeing from chains, but learning to dance with them. Passion will continue existing, with its highs and lows, with its pleasures and wounds. What changes is our relationship with it. Instead of slaves, we become artists who transform suffering into creation, who make intensity a motor of growth, not destruction. This freedom isn't something conquered once and for all. It's a constant exercise, a learning repeated with each new passion, each new loss. We're forged by experiences that mark us, and each wound can make us more conscious, stronger, more capable of loving without illusions. This is true emancipation, not being immune to pain, but being willing to cross through it again and again. In the end, passion stops being just torment or ecstasy. It reveals itself as path, as test that brings us closer to ourselves. Those who learn to deal with passion discover that freedom isn't in denying the heart, but in accepting its vulnerability without letting oneself be imprisoned by it. It's freedom conquered in the middle of fire, and for that very reason, so valuable. Nietzsche therefore invites us to a new perspective. Passion isn't enemy, nor goddess. It's just one of life's faces, and if lived with courage, can lead us to what's deepest, the capacity to be masters of ourselves. Freedom isn't born from passion's absence, but from the strength to cross through it and transform it into wisdom. We reach the end of this journey, and perhaps you've perceived that passion, for Nietzsche, was never just sweetness or condemnation. It's vital force and danger, suffering and creation, will to power, and also possibility of overcoming. We cross the path from blind surrender to the discovery of amor fati, where we learn to love not just life's pleasure, but also its inevitable pain. What Nietzsche offers us isn't consolation, but revelation. Passion shouldn't be feared nor idealized, but faced as a test that brings us closer to who we really are. Each wound can become forge, each loss can teach us freedom. The true challenge is not to flee, but to affirm life even when it tears us inside. And now, the question I leave to you. Which passion hurt you most, but also transformed you most? Share your answer in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and join this community that grows in depth with each encounter. If this content resonated with you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and follow us on this philosophical journey. Thank you for being here. Together, we continue not in search of comfort, but of awakening, because it's in passion's darkness that we often discover life's truest flame.